Welcome to another edition of Cultivating the Culture. I'm Tariq Lang, filling in for your host, Tariq Ibn Tariq. And I'm here with brother Muhammad Ibn Bashir, and we're going to be discussing his book, Raw Law, An Urban Guide to Criminal Justice. We'll show you a Malcolm X intro, and we'll get right back with you.
Well, do you feel that you then, perhaps, now should take over the leadership of the black Muslims?
No, I have no desire to take over the leadership of the black Muslims, and I have never had that desire. But I do have this desire. I have a desire to see the Afro-American in this country get the human rights that are his due. I believe that the Islam religion is the best religion for our people because it creates unity and it gives one dignity and racial confidence and all of these things that are necessary to make a complete human being.
So this generation, especially of our people, have a burden upon themselves more so than at any other time in history. The most important thing we can learn how to do today is think for ourselves. It's good to keep wide open ears and listen to what everybody else has to say. But when you come to make a decision, you have to weigh all of what you heard of its own and place it where it belongs. And then come to a decision for yourself, and you'll never regret it. But if you form the habit of taking what someone else says about a thing without checking it out for yourself, you'll find that other people will have you hating your own friends and loving their enemies. And this is one of the things that our people are beginning to learn today, that it's very important to think out a situation for yourself. If you don't do it, then you'll always be maneuvered into you'll never fight your enemies, but you will find yourself fighting your own self.
Okay, welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Today we'll be discussing, like we said, Raw Law with the brother Muhammad Bashir. Muhammad Bashir, frequent member of the show. We're glad to have you back.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me. You guys always try to look out for me, so that's a blessing.
Man,
God bless you and your dad.
Man, I mean, you got it started in it, so we appreciate that. Okay, man. So we have Raw Law. It's a book that I've had the honor of reading. I was telling the brother that this is a book that should be on every shelf in every store and read by every kid, especially our people. Can you tell them something about the book?
Sure. It started out, may I?
Yes, absolutely.
Just for the audience, it started out self-published as Raw Law, a hip-hop guide to criminal justice. When I wrote it, that was maybe 10 years into the practice of law, and anger from the practice of law and what I was really seeing versus the ideal of what you're taught in law school, that you're going to finish law school, you're going to go out there, you're going to fight the good fight, and you're going to represent the people, etc. You're going to that the people are going to be you're going to stand up for justice no matter who it's for or who it's against. And then you find out that the system is something totally different. It's not designed for justice. So the anger began to build, and since I had some journalism in my background, I decided to, as Chuck D said, when I get mad, put it down on a pad, give you something that you never had. So I decided that would be my way of venting, and it turned into Raw Law, Hip Hop Guide to Criminal Justice. And then I started doing some writing for an urban magazine called Don Diva. They asked me to do a Raw Law column, and with that, it got the book and the column got hot on the streets, and corporate America came calling, and they produced Raw Law, an urban guide to criminal justice. And so, I was willing to make the deal with them to find out, because I wanted to find out the in and out of publishing. I think I did, which is why I have my own publishing company now. I'm no longer dealing with corporate America if I can avoid it.
Okay,
I hope it adds to the discussion of what criminal justice really is about. That's what brought it about. And again, like I said, the fact that you read it and you believe it's worth reading, to me, that's flattering.
Right. So let me ask you, what do you believe criminal justice is about?
The system in and of itself is consistent with the history of America. Since America was created, the ultimate goal has been the gathering of wealth by white supremacists / white elites to the suppression of anyone else beneath them, whether it be poor whites, middle class whites, and especially blacks. So they created a hierarchy. As part of that particular hierarchy, they recognized that no other groups could move in and out of that hierarchy as long as they didn't impact on the power and the money of elite whites. So they created a system to control the one group that could not move in and out of that hierarchy, the enslaved population of black people. Criminal justice is exactly that, the enforcement arm of every other system that was created to grant white supremacy wealth and therefore keep the only people who would really want to change that system at bay and crushed. And that's what it does. It literally is a system designed to suppress the rights and privileges and humanity of black people.
And so your goal in this book was literally to give the dialogue, the terms, and all the scenarios and just suppress it into something fast enough, you know, for someone to read and be able to understand and maneuver their way through that system.
There you go. And what I learned, I guess from my own education, is that our community is always the community that's talked about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like,
they're always the one talked about, but they're never the ones that's talked to or spoken for. So even though I didn't think I had the credentials at that time to speak for our community, I did think that I had the bona fides to be able to talk to our community. So if you read it, when you read it, you notice that there's stories.
Yes.
That stories that lead to the law. So I'll give you the story, fact pattern, etc., and then break down the law and eventually give you an outcome. Our community learns from stories.
Exactly.
That's what hip hop is. That's what jazz is. We learn from the stories. So it was written so that our community could grasp it and then see, hopefully, the bigger picture.
Okay. And so, you know, it breaks it down. You've broken it down into every scenario possible, essentially. You know, you have rules, rule. That's the initial, you know, what would you describe rules, rule as?
To help our community understand that this is a game of, criminal justice is a game of rules. If you don't know the rules, no sense in you being out there. I don't care how good your jump shot is, you can't shoot it from out of bounds. It don't count. You know what I mean? No matter what, every game that's out there has a group of rules. The one group in the community that doesn't understand the rules, unfortunately, is ours.
Yes.
We don't have a clue what we're getting into when we walk in the criminal justice system, but we think we can handle it because of something we saw on television. We saw the practice. We saw LA Law maybe a generation ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We saw a couple of movies that starred Michael B. Jordan, and we think we know some
We
rules.
understand it.
We saw a hip hop trial, so and so. We think we understand the rules, but we don't. And it plays out generation after generation that we don't know the rules. And so therefore we get locked into some scenarios that if we just knew the rules and we knew what the intent was, perhaps we'd make better decisions. And the best decision would be to try to find a way to stay your behind out of it.
Exactly. And so, like I was telling you before the show, I actually wanted to name the show and title this episode, "The Only Real Way Out Is Not to Get In." And that's a quote that he has in the book later on. And it's, I mean, it's impactful, it's simple, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
The only real way out is to just stay out. And,
That's right.
You know, do not get in. And so, but in this chapter, Rules Rule, you talk about a scenario where you come into, not an altercation, but, you know, a scenario where the people who think they know the rules or understand the rules, and you're someone who understands the rules to a T and knows the way through and the wisdom of it later on, you know, you cross paths with them.
Yeah.
And so that story is where, you know, you go back to take pictures for a criminal case, and, you know, you turn a corner and you forget the rules for a second.
Yeah.
and it bites you. You know what happened? You lose at that moment. But, you know, would you talk about that?
In every scenario in criminal justice, there are rules. And what I tried to do with the book is to say, you know, you have rules on the street. I can't go to Bradley Court Housing Project in the middle of the night, you know, and leave my car running. This Bradley Court Housing Project, for those who don't know, is in the heart of Newark. Newark was at that time the capital of car thefts. I can't leave my car there. New car, in the wrong neighborhood, I'm out taking pictures. I come back, my car is driving down the street. I forgot the rules. All right? I'm also looking now, I'm stranded out in Newark. Newark is hot. And I could see, knowing, having been grown up in Elizabeth and Newark, the body language of some of these cats is trying to figure out how they're going to get at me.
Yeah.
That's another rule. Now I got to remember, I got to get back to who I am. I got to get back to what the rules on the street are. So the first thing I do is I'm looking at trying to see who got the best body language and who got the worst body language. On the street, you know, the cat that got the most mouth ain't the one you really want to talk to. It's the one that's laid in the cut. He's the one giving all the... So I walk over to them. Yo, you. What happened to my car? Nigga, don't be asking me about your car, blah, blah, blah. It's cool. Get on my phone, and I call the cat who I represented, who I know ran the Bradley Court Housing Project, the drug dealer. That's the rules. I ain't calling the cops to that neighborhood, because if I do, then I become persona non grata in that neighborhood. Ain't nobody gonna call me to represent them in that neighborhood. So I call my man. Yo, somebody stole my car. I'm at your spot. You supposed to run this. 20 minutes later, my car pulls up. Ignition pop, they left the screwdriver in, and dude walks over to me and apologizes. I didn't know it was you, Bash. I'm like burnt, but I'm also remembering, follow the rules, follow the rules. It's the same thing in the courtroom. You can't forget that because you're on the street, you can't transfer the street rules into the courtroom. Now when you walk into the courtroom, you better be dressed properly, you better be speaking properly, you better be watching to see what everybody's doing, you better watch and see what your lawyer's doing. There are rules. He's talking to the prosecutor. You mad because he's talking to the prosecutor. That's a rule. He has to talk to the prosecutor. She has to talk to the prosecutor. They offering you a deal. He has to, that prosecutor, that he or she has to offer you a deal. You understand? That 9 times out of 10. They don't always have to, but 9 times out of 10 they're going to. So when your lawyer comes back to you with I got a plea offer on the table, you can't get mad. That's the rules. They following the rules. When the prosecutor offers you, makes your lawyer an offer, they have to tell you that offer. Because if they don't, what happens? You go to trial, you lose. You get 20 years. There was a 4-year deal on the table. You get to say ineffective assistance of counsel. You get to say, I want this cat disbarred. I want his license. So he has to come back to you and say, this is the rule. This is what's going on. This is what the plea offer is. So you can't get mad. These are the rules. When you got into the game, learn the rules. That's all I say.
And you know, what I loved most about that story, honestly, at the end, you mentioned it, is though that when they came to talk to you after, you know, you were there, you got your car back, the same people that, you know, you got into the altercation with, they sat there and you made them work with you, you know. You used them with the criminal case, and they, you know.
And they loved it, man. And look, I know people are. I have my own show. I used the book to create my own show, and I was telling people about the reason why we have guns. I was asking, why do we have guns in our neighborhood? And frankly, the vast majority of us has guns in our neighborhood because we're afraid of our children. Truth be told, there ain't none of us going out protecting our property from whomever. We have it because we're afraid of our kids, our own kids.
Yeah,
I mean, if we just be honest, then we can just come out and say it. Because we got 400 years of lynching, Jim Crow, white destruction, all kinds of stuff going on, all kinds of violence against us, and we ain't pull a gun on not one. We just concerned about that kid that's going to walk up on us on the street. All right? So if we be honest about that. So then the question becomes, how is it that we get to impact through the criminal justice system? How do we get to impact on our kids? And for me, that's what that story is all about. At the end, I reach out to them and say, look, I need your help. Now that you took my car and held me up, I need X, Y, and Z. And you know, each one of them volunteered. Some of the hardest cats that's out there on the block. Like, yo, and did you see so-and-so and so? You investigating this. Look over here. Tell you how that story really ends. I'm in the middle of a trial. I'm trying one of the kids from Bradley Court. That's why I'm out there. One of the kids who got popped in Bradley Court. And he is alleged that the feds raided the place. And he allegedly tosses 2 kilos of cocaine out the window. And it falls down on the ground, and there's a DEA agent waiting there. And he scoops it up, and they tie him to it, and they charge him with it. I've been to Bradley Court. So I'm thinking, if he threw it out the window, it would land on one of them big black fire escapes that they have at the bottom of these windows. So I'm out taking pictures of the window.
Yeah.
So when the kids are there, I'm like, can you get up there and let me take a picture of you on here? So everybody could see these fire escapes, because the officer's report doesn't reflect any fire escapes, doesn't reflect any impediments to the stuff falling out the window. He said he dropped it out the window. Now, there's a difference in the law especially in facts when you're questioning someone about whether or not they tossed it,
Drop.
or they dropped. He said he dropped. And so I did what lawyers do. When you said drop, did you mean he did it like this? He held his hand out the window and dropped it? Yes. So he didn't toss it, you're saying.
Yes.
Because if he had tossed it, you been a pro, you would have written the word tossed,
Exactly.
right? I understand the difference between toss, arrogant, behind, officer,
He's setting
right?
himself
He's
up.
setting himself up. So he dropped it, right? So I introduced the pictures. The judge cuts all the pictures out. No. I'm not allowing any of these pictures in. What do you mean not allowing any of these pictures in? It's evidence. He testified that he dropped it. The only place it could have dropped is here.
Yeah.
I'm not allowing those pictures in. One of the jurors, I got 6 jurors who are black. They're sitting in seats 1, 2, 3, 8, 9, and 10, like this, and the rest of the jury. And the judge is blasting me, on me. Every time I try to do something to show that this officer was lying, the judge is on me. And I'm just like, you can see the frustration on my face because every question he's interrupting. I got transcripts of what he testified to before, how many times he said dropped as opposed to toss, etc. And one of the jurors is sitting in the front row, juror number 1. I lean on the thing like this here. The judge is like, Mr. Bashir, if you ask another question like that, da-da-da-da-da. He does just like this. He puts his hand down and said, don't worry about it, brother. We got you.
Oh, for real? Wow.
He went out to Bradley Court
Sure.
during the lunch break and took a picture of the fire escape. He said, I'm from that neighborhood. There's no way that it didn't hit the fire escape, and he showed it to all the other jurors.
Yeah.
Now, he's not supposed to do that.
But they're not supposed to do what they were doing.
One of the jurors reported it. Someone went out to the crime scene and took a picture of the fire escape. The judge calls us all in. He's mad. He's blasting the jury. I told you not to go out to the crime scene. Da-da-da-da-this, da-da-da-da. No one will say who it is because nobody knew who actually took the picture. I knew who took the picture because he told me. Don't worry, brother. I got you. And he says to me, Mr. Bashir, you want a mistrial? Because he did something, whoever it was who was jury did something illegal. You want a mistrial? I'm like, no. You think you're going to bait me into a mistrial? Which means I got to select a whole new jury panel for the same trial? After this brother just told me, I got you? And if the issue was he went out to the housing project that I know he saw what I was trying to establish?
Yeah.
And sure enough, found him not guilty in 10 minutes. After the judge blasted them, and the judge was, he was so angry, you could see the redness in his face. He was just so angry. But that's how that story eventually winds up.
Okay, yeah.
Crazy,
you
right?
can't vote any other way.
Yeah, you
You're not
can't.
allowed to.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, mashallah, those are all things that.
Now you know why it's called raw law.
Yeah.
That's the real
It's true.
law. This is the real
It's
law.
the truth. And so you talked about this, you break down these steps and the processes that you go through. Like you talked about your public defender. And in this, you reference it as the chapter, it is public pretender.
Public pretender.
You know, and you talk about it and you break down essentially the life of, a public defender, the pressures that they're under, but at the end of the day, over time, there's a callousness that sets in, and there's a preference that sets in on, their objectives throughout each case and throughout the day. And
Facts.
when your life is just one of many, it becomes minuscule compared to what it really is. So that's the reality of it.
That's a perfect way to sum it up. You become minuscule. Considering all that they have, all the weight they have on their shoulders. They have a judge beating them up that they got 20 cases on his docket, and he's not getting any numbers because you're not pleading out enough cases. And they don't have time to go out and do the actual investigation themselves, so they get an investigator who's paid dirt cheap. They can't match the power and the money that the state has, because their prosecutors may have 100 cases, but they have 5 investigators, and they have the police, and they have money, a budget, to go out and do whatever it is that this particular prosecutor wants. But you're a public defender, you don't have any of that. You have your caseload and your heart. And the minute you lose your heart, that's when, look, just take this deal. You'll get probation. I'll argue for a 3. You're facing 20. If you go to trial and you lose, you're going to get 20. And you thinking, but I didn't do nothing. And I'm telling you, I say this in the book. I may have said it in the book. I know I said it in some writings. No matter how innocent you are, when they come to you with that deal, and they tell you you're facing 20 years if you lose, I know some kids who will confess to murdering John F. Kennedy and they're only 18 years old.
Yeah.
they don't even know who John F. Kennedy is, but they would say they were on the grassy knoll.
Yeah.
They fired a rifle, Oswald ducked, and they hit Kennedy. If they can get probation.
That's sad. That's a sad reality.
That's the reality that goes on in our community.
Reality.
So you want to know a statistic? 90% of the cases that are charged in America end in a plea. So you don't know that the kid did it or not. You just know that he admitted to doing it.
Yeah, 90%.
90% in almost every jurisdiction. How crazy is that? And it's 9 times out of 10, it's the Khalif Browder situation. Khalif Browder being the young boy who was in New York. He couldn't make bail, so he sat there for 3 years in isolation, waiting for a trial. Then when they eventually dismiss it, he's already lost his mind. He kills himself.
Yeah.
But that's what happens. I'm sitting there, I'm waiting. I lost my job. I lost my girl. My kids don't recognize me. Everybody's saying I committed this crime. Just give me something that can get me out of here. And I'm telling you, it happens much more than most people think. But that's how vicious it is, and that's why I say if you can avoid getting in it, stay away from it.
Because that's what I was honestly about to say that because I wanted to ask you what's a solution, but that's why we came back to it. The only way out is to stay out.
Do your best to stay out of it, and believe me, that's harder than you think.
No,
because if you were watching, Miami-Dade just had a shootout, mass shooting,
yes,
right? But a year ago, they had a mass arrest. They rounded up 60 people, all black men, because they had open burglaries in their neighborhood. And the chief said, charge every black person you find. So they just run around gathering black people and charging them with burglary and making them plead out. You're not going to get bail, so you might as well plead. And it just so happened that one of the officers spilled the beans on all of the officers. And 2 or 3 of them wound up going to prison. But 40 of these people pled guilty just to get out of jail to burglaries that they had no idea happened. Now, I'll give you another viciousness of the criminal justice system. Because I was on a conversation with some boys the other day talking about black on black crime and the crime statistics. Do you know that not one of those 60 burglaries that had black convictions are taken off the crime stats? Even though they would just prove that none of these, that these were all made up by the police. They don't come off your crime stats. So still in Miami, they think that the high crime rate is strictly a black on black thing. How do you avoid that?
And how often does that happen?
Bruh, think about it. You had it in New York at least 5 times, right? This is in the last 10, 15 years. At least 5 times. You had it in LA at least 2 times. You had it in Baltimore just 3 years ago. 3 or 4 years ago where they caught this whole ring of cops framing people and selling drugs, etc., right? So this one happened in Miami. They had one in Louisiana, right? I mean, it's all over. They had one in Boston where a lady convicted like 600 people by forging drug tests. They eventually found out that she was fudging drug tests, and they had to go back and dismiss 600 cases. But those stats stay on the record.
And we're in a time where there's more oversight. There's more reform. So can you imagine 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and this is how we are where we are.
Yeah.
Like in the book, like you say that, or you said, we're scared of our kids, essentially. That's how you create something like that.
That's right. That's right. The kids don't have any respect for you. Frankly, they don't have any respect for the generation that came before them because they didn't introduce them to what was going to happen to them in the street. That's the first thing. And then secondly, they don't have an education about the system so that they can avoid it on their own. Think back to your Central Park 5. You ever seen that movie that they did on Central Park 5?
Yeah.
You see the scene where the kid is in there telling his father he didn't do anything? And his father's telling him, just talk. He's pushing him in. Think he's helping, but he's pushing him into potentially a life sentence, or at least a prison sentence.
Yes.
Because he don't know, and he don't know how to translate it over to his son. And he don't really know what he's fighting for. And therein, that's the dilemma of our community. We don't really know what we're fighting against, and we unfortunately don't know really what we're fighting for.
And that's the purpose, and somebody that we've talked about a lot on here, that they've the focus and the what's the word, the organization, on a driven goal, but there is no purpose, there is no organization going towards one singular thing, and
Facts.
it's just everyone learning on their own,
Yes.
and having really no direction.
Right. And the only time we ever get any direction is once we're already in it. That's when people begin to start talking about reform. I mean, think about it. George Floyd got a knee on his neck, and people are talking about reform. But here's what happened with George Floyd. So you get the layers. George Floyd was murdered on the street.
Yes.
People could see the murder. George Floyd's officers filed a false report. George Floyd's officers had a history of doing this kind of activity. Minneapolis police has a history. Minneapolis police,
Yes.
not just the four with George Floyd. Minneapolis police has a history of these kind of activities. So you got 4 layers. That means that when they did their other cases, they came to court if somebody challenged them or pled not guilty and testified falsely. That means that the prosecutor put on false evidence in a case. That means someone who was innocent was convicted based on false evidence presented by a cop, by the prosecutor, etc. He didn't die. His life was just destroyed. Think about that. That's the stuff that doesn't make it to the major media because you don't have the foot on the neck. But that's what goes on each and every day. And that's what, when I hear people talk about reform, that's the part that I say we got to get to. We got to get to the point to where we can question these guys who take the witness stand in these cases and be able to say, all right, police have no credibility. They start with no credibility as opposed to start with the indicia of credibility that comes with being a police officer.
So with this past year, do you see us moving in that direction or no?
No, because we're missing it. Again, we're talking about our community. We're not listening to our community. Give you another example. Freddie Gray, Baltimore, Maryland. What did the people say happened to Freddie? The people on the street said they could hear him screaming, and the people on the street said the officer bent him like a pretzel. But the people on the street have no credibility. So the prosecutor had to rely on who? On the medical examiner, who said that Freddie injured his neck on a rough ride in the van. Then why was he screaming out on the street? And why were they dragging him and his legs weren't moving to get into the van? The reason why is because the people on the street were the ones who were trying to tell them the truth. The people on the street are constantly bringing Baltimore police to the prosecutor office. But it took somebody, what happened in Baltimore? They were investigating, the feds were investigating a drug dealer, a group of drug dealers. And they had them on the wire. Now, this is the most ironic thing I ever heard in my life. They got drug dealers out of Baltimore on a wire. Isn't that The Wire? The show The Wire was out of Baltimore. They recorded kids. It's the stupidest thing you ever heard. But guess who they catch on the wire? The cops. Cutting a deal with the drug dealers. So the feds is in town investigating the drug dealers for federal offenses, and they catch Baltimore cops on it. When they go back and they check these cops out, once they arrest them, they find their record. There's hundreds of complaints by ordinary average citizens of these cops planting drugs and this, that, and the third. Because they're not listening to the people. The people know what's going on in their neighborhood. They can tell you who's hustling. You just got to protect me if I tell you. But they'll tell you who's dirty. You just have to trust me when I tell you. And it doesn't happen. And when you see these police reforms, you only see them on the level of no chokehold, because it was caught on camera. You don't see testifying. Any officer caught testifying falsely on the record automatically loses his pension, automatically fired, automatically can't get another job with another place, automatically has to pay the family reparations or the person who got arrested. Then, all of a sudden, now you're talking about reform.
Yes. Yeah, because you're hurting people directly.
Now you're hitting them directly. That's right.
Yeah, other than, 1 or 2 cops that have made examples of.
That's right.
And that's what's happening.
That's
a lot of them
exactly.
have just made examples of one of them, 2 of them, but there's so much going on underneath where it's at a rampant rate. I mean, the fact that it's happening within more than one person is abhorrent. I mean, it's ridiculous, and it's a sad reality. It's honestly a sad reality that things like this, the book, they prep people and give them a, blinders to focus on one thing, because we don't have the opportunity to do as other people can, and it's like I said, it's a sad reality. It's sad to say that I wish we did, but until we do, we have to focus.
That's right. We have to organize, we have to focus, and we have to educate our kids on what the reality of being black, Latin, poor, white is here in America. What the reality is, not what the ideal is. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the ideal. The reality is 100% different. The reality is you get that knee on your neck. The reality is if I say you're going to wear these drugs, you're going to wear these drugs. If I say give me your identification, you give me your identification. If the cops say you did it, I'm the prosecutor. He said you did it. You eating it, whether you like it or not. Even whether I can prove it or not. Because what will happen is, I talked to you about this in the book as well. A prosecutor will indict you on a higher charge, knowing that he really has a different charge in mind, and plead you out in the range that he wants. So he'll give you a higher level of the indictment, first degree, second degree, but he really knows it's a third degree. You won't do that with an ordinary, average, rich white person, because they know that they'll challenge that. They didn't charge Derek Chauvin with first-degree murder. Do you think he intended to kill that man, being on his neck for 9 minutes?
Yes.
Everybody who saw it thought it was an intentional killing. But in order for you to prove first-degree murder, you have to prove what? Intentional killing. Why didn't they indict him on an intentional killing?
Was it too hard to prove?
No, it had nothing to do with hard to prove. That's what their argument was. It had the fact to do that he was white, and no white cop has ever been indicted for first-degree murder and been charged and convicted of first-degree murder in America.
They know they'll open a can of worms.
You open up a serious can of worms. If they convict him, if they have to try to convict him of first-degree murder. You think all those cops would have came in and testified against him if they had charged him with first-degree murder, intent to kill, based on his conduct? Because all of them had done it. All of them have done the knee on the neck and everything like that. Oh,
it's over. Yeah, and that's why they, So you talk about another section, a case of rape.
Yeah.
And that's a very touchy subject, and it's how do you feel it relates to our community specifically?
That's an actual story, and most of the stories there are actual. Because they are actual stories, I can twist the facts just a little bit so that I'm not giving anybody's confidentiality. So I want the people to know.
Okay.
But it's a conglomeration of a couple of stories. I usually write in three sections. Rape is one of the biggest crimes going on in our community that we keep always pushing under the rug. It's happening to our children, and I don't mean I don't just mean our 5-year-olds. I mean our babies, our middle teenagers, our kids at school. All right? They are being raped. They're being sexually assaulted at an alarming rate. But what I try to do in this one is, one, to give you the law, but I try to use a scenario that an adult could understand. And that scenario is, what is it happens when you say, how do you say no? And what's the perception? And what do I do when I walk into the court as a defense attorney defending that guy that you just called rape on? How do I pick you apart so that maybe you, as the person who's charged, the guy, will check your behavior? Because I explained his behavior and how it just don't meet the standard. And then the girl, how you check your behavior, because that behavior is going to be used against you at a trial. The way you dress is going to be used against you at a trial. I don't care what you say. I know you think that these niggas got to do such and such. They need more control.
That's not the reality.
That's not the reality. No. They don't have that kind of control. Ain't no sense in you pretending that they do. So hopefully this checks some behavior. Hopefully the story is intended to address an issue that is like, it booms in our community. I mean, it's so prevalent, it's like scary. It's violence. It's ethos. It's emotion. It's destructive, but it's something that for some reason we seem to just think it's you're going to change somebody's mind overnight, and then, or you're going to be the one that gets away in that particular scenario. You're not going to get away. You're not going to get away with your other guy, and I've had my share of acquittals on those kind of cases, but you're not going to get away with it if you're the guy, unless you're a white boy who rapes a girl behind a dumpster, and you got a college scholarship, so the judge gives you probation But if you black, you ain't getting probation.
No. They're throwing you under the building.
Oh, it's so far under the building, bro. By the time you get up, by the time you get up, it'll be judgment day. But that's the way it is, and I hope to point out that behavior goes on both sides. And when you're weighing that, and the prosecutor has a job, and the defense attorney has a job, all bets are off when you walk into that courtroom. And if you don't know the rules that all bets are off, then you're going to get what you get. And unfortunately, it turns out a lot like that, and especially with things like the Me Too movement. I literally, this no joke, I've seen lawyers who actually argued. She just followed the Me Too movement. Just like that. This is just a Me Too kind of thing. She mad, he dumped her, she mad, she was out with it.
And I mean, did it work?
Yeah, I've seen it work, and I've seen where it failed. I've also seen where the guy has come in, and he didn't do it. And the girl yells rape. And he's a football player. He's a star athlete. Yeah. And his thing is shot because he got convicted, and now he's got to work 2 or 3 years, and then the appeal overturned because she finally came out and said it didn't happen. But the prime years of his life are gone, and nobody wants to touch him because he's a convicted rapist, even though it was overturned.
I mean, you see a lot of cases where there isn't even a conviction, but just the claim of ruins your whole career.
Absolutely. There's a football player, I think, in Texas right now going through just that. Right, where he got all these allegations coming. Bill Cosby, all these allegations. I mean, he was convicted on allegation. There were so many allegations that it didn't matter about the credibility of the witnesses or the time frame that they took to report it. He had so many allegations. He's like R. Kelly. R got so many allegations against him. The tape with him peeing on somebody won't even matter.
You don't even hear about that anymore.
You don't even hear about it.
Oh, but you were talking about Deshaun Watson. That's what you're talking about.
That's right.
It's, in the public eye, when it was 4, when it was even 5, it was like, okay, you make. When he got to 23,
forget about it, right?
Forget about it, yeah.
Because they only need to get you with 1.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you're done, absolutely.
Exactly. In the public eye, 23, you're already, somewhat, diminished. So throughout the book, you go through the stages and you go through the different scenarios that you may run into, and you also break down the, like you said, hierarchy. So it moves from the judge, to what's underneath, and it moves down from there to where you are, and as all your view on all this as a lawyer, and how you view, your job, and how you view and how you interact with, your client essentially. And so one of my favorite chapters is judge, jury, and execution. Because it's such a sad, it's sad, and but it just breaks down everything from the top down, and sad to use the word again, but how minuscule you are in the eyes of these people making the decision based on your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when I wrote that, I gave it to a judge to read. And he asked me, "Are you sure you want to publish this?"
Really? And I
said, "Yeah." I said, "Are you offended by it?" He said, "No, because it's not me, but I've seen it." And the bottom line is, at that level of thinking, I want you to imagine this. This is the way I try to outline it. Judge is white, middle to upper class. The cop is white, middle to lower class. They went through the same school system. They have the same thought process as it relates to you, and you're not white, middle class, or upper class. You're just black. Whether you be middle, upper, or whatever, you're still black. They don't understand what comes with your community. They don't understand how you fit in, except that you have to fit into their system. They don't even understand the language you talk. And they're making judgments about you. I mean, I literally used to sit there in courts and say, "Judge, black people don't think like that." No, I'm telling you, this is the truth. A judge, black people don't think like that. And it was, "What do you mean?" That's white people thinking. Black people don't think like that. I had a judge say to me, I was introducing evidence in a trial of bias. Bias is always relevant. Every lawyer in a book will tell you. And this Latino was testifying against my client who happened to be black. And I had a tape of him calling him a nigger and how we got to control these niggers because they taking over our neighborhood. But he was being put on by the prosecutor as a friend of my client. He's his boy, so he would confess to him that he did the theft. I'm like, no, he's not a friend. He's biased. He's Latin flavored. He's in favor of the Latino community being over the black community, and he calls him a nigger. And the judge said, I'm not allowing you to admit this tape. I said, bias is always relevant. Here's the rule, cited the rule, etc. He said, yeah, but nigga is a term of endearment.
And that's why I will never understand when someone tells me that we've turned it into a term of endearment.
Yeah.
And so then I just asked the person, okay, so then when you are talking about a black person who you feel is lesser, you're saying he's acting like a nigga. Mm-hmm. So even you address it in a term of negativity. So
That's
how
right.
is it a term of endearment? What do you think they're saying it as?
That's right. But that's the mindset. These people are making judgments about you that have no connection to your community. This is why a kid can run over some people in Texas. A young boy, 17, kill 4 people, manslaughter, right? Mm-hmm. And he can get probation because he's affluent.
Yeah.
They call it affluenza.
Affluenza, like it's a flu.
Like he's because he understands where he's coming from. That judge and that lawyer and that kid are connected on a level of education and understanding and culture. But they don't understand hip hop. They don't understand black emotion. They don't understand post-traumatic slave syndrome. They don't understand any of that. But they're making judgments based on their standard, and at their standard, you were meant to be controlled. You have to be controlled. This is why sentencing disparity. Blacks are sentenced higher than whites for the exact same crime. Sentencing disparity says this community needs to be controlled, so I have to give them the harsher sentence. But this community can be rehabilitated. This community is crack addicts. This community is an opioid crisis.
That's where we are now.
Right? So you can get treatment for this one. You got to get prison for this one. Because they don't understand you on the level that you think you should be understood on. You're like, what's going on here? But that's what's going on here. They do not see you. They wind up being judges, and you wind up being in prison. They are making judgments on you based on their standard of what is right and wrong, not on a standard that they even understand that comes from a value system that you might have.
I mean, so in that part, what do you think is, I mean, obviously the solution is to get more, of our people in that position. But you see it, so what do you think? Because I see an influx of judges, black judges here, and so you would think that that's actually
you would think that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you see, you're not old enough to remember the 1960s.
Uh-huh.
So let me tell you about the 1960s. No black representatives in Congress. Black people petitioned and took to the streets and had the civil rights movement, blah, blah, blah. And then they began to get your Mayor Coleman Youngs. They began to get your senators from, I forget what the guy's name was, from Massachusetts. They get the black people in higher places. And right on the heels of that, they got the war on drugs. And right on the heels of that, they got mass incarceration. And the people who were voting to support war on drugs and mass incarceration were who? This same black leadership. So black faces in high places only meant one thing to me. They were getting the same education about the black community that white people were getting about the black community. That this was a community that had to be controlled. Yeah. So now they put out a Clarence Thomas because he can control the black community. Now they put out a black chief of police in Minneapolis because he can identify with the black community. He could control the black community better. Not that he could change the ethos, change the pattern, understand the patterns that go on in the community, but he could control it better. And that's what you get. Now, do I think there need to be more faces there? Yeah. But I tell you this here, just like they always say in policing, make them live in the community that they police so that people can see them walking down the street every day, going to the grocery store every day, and then they can get a feel for the community. And the community can get a feel for them. There's nothing like being where I'm from. I used to go play ball on 1st Street in Elizabeth, New Jersey at the center. And I was going there when I was a kid. So when I'm showing up now as this lawyer, this hotshot lawyer, people seeing me on TV and stuff, these kids are like, ain't you so-and-so's cousin? I'm like, yeah. I'm in the middle of balling, and cats is bringing their discovery to me. When you finish balling, could you just like look over my son's paperwork? Now, because they understand that I know I haven't run from the community. They understand, and they're not afraid to come to me and say, can you help me? Or I'm getting a bad deal. Or I did wrong, can you help me? But you can't get that in our community. The minute we get into that upper echelon of education, we move into that suburb to get away from the people that we said we were getting into this to help. The best way to help them is to be there to help me. If I'm drowning, I don't want you calling the phone. I want you jumping in the water or putting a pole in or something, but you got to be there to be there. Don't call somebody on the phone and say, hey, I heard Muhammad was drowning. Get in the water. Pull me out. And that's what it takes.
Brother, those very, very, very powerful words, man. I mean, so do you have anything that you would like to close up about the book? Or?
Just that I'm really, I've been asked to do a Raw Law 2 because people want to hear about the federal system. I don't do a lot on the federal system. I don't do a lot on what's commonly now called prison reform and criminal justice reform. I just try to explain. People want to hear about the police violence, etc., and what it really means, and where it's really coming from, and what we can do to move forward. So I'm thinking about doing a second version to it. I hope this is beneficial. I hope people like it when they read it. I've gotten really good reviews. Everybody who has read it has really liked it. So I'm proud of that work that we put into it. And I just hope it's some benefit somewhere to someone.
Well, it benefit me. Yeah, because it's an easy read, and it's also very informative throughout the whole thing. You have words, you have the definitions, you have them highlighted, and so you can read a couple pages and you look back and you're like, oh, I learned something. At the same time, I'm reading stories, and it's and so that's what makes it a great book. And I honestly would love for people to go out and read this and find ways to promote things like this and make sure they get in the hands of everybody. Not just, try and get it there. No, make it mandatory, make it requirements, and, have people.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. I have a teacher here in D.C. who told me just that maybe about 6 months ago. He bought a copy for everyone in his class.
And that's it.
And he said, I made this part and parcel of my course, that whenever something happens in the class, we open up Raw Law. Something happens on the street, we open up Raw Law. All right, now, what's the thought process? What are we thinking? What are we doing? That kind of thing. And he said every year that he teaches, he's going to make it a part of his course curriculum.
Well, let me ask you, in order to do something like that, I mean, did he have to have a principal in line with, his curriculum, or is that something extremely difficult to do?
That's a great question. He's not the only teacher who has asked me if they could use the book. I think it's really just a matter of what it is that he's teaching consistent.
Yes.
Almost every school has some constitutional law, some kind of civics or social a social studies kind of course, and he just incorporated it into his social studies as a way of giving them something unique.
Well, we're gonna have to try to make that an initiative because you push something like that, and that's the goal. That's the goal of this show.
Wow,
and to try and push and pass knowledge along. Man, you saw the Black Wall Street? The anniversary is tomorrow.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. All right. If so far, I want you to go through the TV, and you'll find 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 documentaries, films, or major discussions about Black Wall Street. Why? 5. MSNBC, CBS, the History Channel,
CNN.
Films, and CNN. All of them have something on Black Wall Street. And I've learned, and Tarek and I always talk about this in Cultivating the Culture, is how they use the media. And they will tell you a story to keep from telling you the story. They are telling you about Black Wall Street, but there were at least 24 similar events that occurred from 1898 with the destruction, 1878 with the destruction of Wilmington, Delaware, through 1921. Black Wall Street is 1921.
The end.
The last realm of it.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There are Elaine, Arkansas. There's Wilmington, Delaware. There's Atlanta, Georgia. There's Washington, D.C., where black people are being slaughtered at random, and the law is doing nothing to protect them. And so I always say, don't focus on the individual incident because it takes you away from the continuum. You can begin to understand the culture of America by the continuum better than you will by one incident. Because people can always point to an incident. George Floyd got killed. An incident. George Floyd is just a continuum of something that has been happening since ad infinitum to black people.
Yeah,
and until black people begin to wrestle with the idea that this is ongoing, they'll always be misled into thinking that we solved George Floyd, we got a conviction with him, and therefore we have something to celebrate.
Yeah.
That's right. And so now that they are recognizing Tulsa, Oklahoma, we now have something to celebrate. At least, now we know. No.
Yes.
This is ongoing, and it was ongoing and continues to be ongoing. And that's the part that we have to come to grips with. And I'll say this. The biggest crime of the century, to me, is the Atlanta child murders. They still haven't solved that crime yet. Right? They are still finding bodies from Black Wall Street. They are still finding mass graves of black people in Texas on the peach orchard somewhere. They are still finding bodies in New York under Wall Street of black people, either mass graves or whatever. And until we wrestle with the totality of the history and begin to put it out there for our children, then our children are always going to be left with isolated incidents as being these patchwork on what it is to struggle. We keep locking into names and isolated incidents as if that is the history, when in fact the history is much broader and much more vicious than anybody is willing to give us credit for. And to me, that's my whole take on Black Wall Street. Yes, teach your kids about Black Wall Street. Let them watch each and every documentary. But when they walk away from it, don't think that
they're informed.
That they know what happened in America during that particular time. All they know is that incident, and that incident is part and parcel of everything that makes up the experience of Black America. And it is not a pretty picture. And the only people who can straighten it out, who are willing to straighten it out, is us.
To help ourselves out in that.
Absolutely.
And I mean, that's a great way to cap everything off.
Alhamdulillah.
Understanding that we are the only ones who can guide our ship, and we're talking about the word direction, and there's always going to be a direction because you're always essentially moving forward, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be moving in the right direction.
There you go.
And so someone's going to be guiding you, whether it's going to be us or whether it's going to be our enemy. And for a long time we've allowed our enemy to guide us.
Facts.
And so it's time to move back towards our direction.
It is so much. It is our time now. Again,
Inshallah.
It's our time. But what we need to understand is, just like when you watch these Black Wall Street things, watch and see whether or not they add to the discussion or whether or not they diminish the discussion. They cut the discussion short. Right? That's my fear.
What
with
do you
this.
mean? Yeah.
That means that if you see Black Wall Street and everybody's talking about reparations on Black Wall Street and paying off the people who were killed in Black Wall Street, that's going to cut the discussion on. Because it ends the continuum.
Yeah.
As opposed to the multiple events that destroy black wealth, that create ghettos, that create migration to the north, that create additional race riots. All of this is part and parcel of a continuum, a continued process that black people have had to experience. And sometimes, like I said, they give you that one, as you said, they give you that one guy and say, you should be happy with that. And nobody, if you get reparations in Tulsa, Oklahoma, everybody say, shut up and go dribble.
Literally.
Right? That's exactly what they'll say.
Literally.
That's exactly what they'll say.
And yeah, I mean, we've come to a point where, we get a lot of symbolic gestures.
Yes.
That, the things that you're talking about, our essential traumas, they come out on a romanticized movie instead of, like you said, just a essential documentary or a, information based show on each and every one of those things. Right. Not a anniversary type, okay, let's talk about this, but every day this is constant knowledge and this is all we're telling you about, but not just to harp on the past, and not to, like you said, just harp on trauma, but to be like, hey, this is continuous and this wasn't a one-off thing. This is how it works. This is how it's continuing to work, and it's repetitive. There you go.
And I always say that if you have a problem and it existed for 400 years and you haven't solved it, either you don't want to solve, someone else don't want to solve, or you don't think it's a problem.
And it's impossible to ask the person who doesn't want to solve it for you.
Not going to solve it. Not going to solve it for you.
That's where
like
we
I said,
are.
that's the ones who give you the platitudes.
Yeah.
Like, we'll give you, each one of us do a program on it, and you'll be good at that.
Yeah.
It's like the I had a dream speech. Everybody can recite I have a dream. That a man should be judged by the color of by the content of his character, not by the color of his skin. I hear white Republican racists say the exact same thing, but can't none of them tell you two words from the second part of that speech, or from the first part of that speech.
What is it?
Nobody can name it. They can't. where he tells America that America wrote a check that has been marked insufficient funds on the black man. They can't tell you about it, but they can tell you, I have a dream. Because they give you these platitudes. You got your dream. Mm-hmm. I mean, I literally have people out here tell you, what are you complaining about? You got a black president. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Think about that. What are you complaining about? I don't care that Douglas Grant got shot in the back of the head. I don't care that Sean Bell was murdered. I don't care that Tamir Rice is 12 years old and got gunned down. You got a black president.
You got a
you know, and that to me is where your focus on one incident in history gives you that platitude. Now shut up. You got, at least you got this. I mean, heck, you got LeBron James. Mm-hmm. Yeah. how you guys struggling? You got LeBron James. Look, I'm telling you, this is the mindset of America. You can go back to any level of America and you can see it. You got Frederick Douglass. What do you need freedom for? We got Frederick Douglass. You happy as slaves. Isn't that what they told us? The slaves were happy as slaves. Why? Because we had Frederick Douglass. Harriet Tubman told us, I freed thousands of slaves. I would have freed thousands more if what? If they had known they were slaves. Mm-hmm. So they could give you these little platitudes over and over, individual incidents, so that you never connect the entire history. When you connect the entire history, those of us who want to see change, this is why they are so afraid, by the way, of Islam. This is why Cultivating the Culture is such a powerful show. Because within the cultivating of the culture, it gives you the concepts of how do you change? How do you change you? How do you change your neighborhood? How do you change your family? How do you change the society with that you focus in? Yes. This is what Tariq gives us each and every week. Ways that you can change, but you change it by the grace of Allah. You have to stay true to the culture that Allah gave you in order for you to change it. And nobody want no part of that. I just want to be able to say that the Lakers won the championship.
People will openly tell you, that's why I can't be Muslim.
Yeah.
I can't be Muslim because it's just too strict.
Yeah, that's right. Because it means you got to change. Yeah. And what does it also mean? The best, you were created as the best of nations for mankind because you encourage what is right and you forbid what is wrong and you believe in Allah. So you have an obligation to, if you're going to be the best nation, to encourage what is right. That means you have to stand up for it. To forbid what is wrong, that means you have to stand against it. But you have to trust Allah and part of it. That's what he means. That's when we first started talking about, he was talking about a nation of Iman. Mm-hmm. That's the idea that he was getting across. That we got a mandate, and it's a beautiful mandate, but we're the only culture that has it. We're the only ones who have that mandate. And that's why we're here. That's why we're in the media now. Because we have to be the ones who set it straight. Tell them what the media is doing. It'll have you, as Malcolm said, hating your friends and loving your enemies. And that's exactly what they do. And that's why this Tulsa thing is, to me, I'm watching it real close just to see what happens. Whether it's a distraction as opposed to, think about it. If you had at least 24 of these types of destructive acts,
we would know.
Where is your anniversary of Elaine, Arkansas?
People don't know about it yet, so it doesn't matter.
Don't matter. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where's your anniversary of Abraham Lincoln lynching 38 Navajos? I think they were Lakotas. Right before they started the Civil War. Where's the anniversary of these incidents, of your Trail of Tears? If you black, you don't even have to use the Native Americans. You can go through a day and pick out a day and say we need an anniversary on this because this was an atrocity.
Yes.
But then you would come to an understanding as to why it has to change. Why we have to be in the forefront of changing, because nobody else is looking at it for a purpose of change. They'll tell you the story, but they won't tell you the story needs to change. And therein lies our problem. That's why I hope this helps people change.
And it will.
Inshallah.
It will. Inshallah, definitely. Put it out there and make sure it does. So, we wrap it up and we try and come up with things every week and try and find ways to, honestly relate and make sure that, not a day is wasted, that knowledge isn't passed along, and just guidance and, heartfelt honesty. And you can see it in the book. When you first started talking, you talked about why you wrote it. And there was a quote you had in here that really showed me that I said, yeah, this I understand in this why he wrote this, and he's saying it. I want to read it. It's, now I am just too angry to keep spitting into the wind. Now I know that the criminal justice system and the hood are both losing propositions. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, once said that the best of us in faith is the one who sees injustice and changes it with his own hands. If he cannot change it with his hands, then he speaks out against it. If he cannot speak out against it, he at least despises in it his heart. If I could, I would rip this system apart and start it all over because it is seriously lost. I can't, so I have to speak out. Yeah. I mean, we appreciate you for speaking out.
MashaAllah, Allah bless you. Thank you for having me, brother. Always a pleasure to see you. Always a pleasure to be in your company.
I mean,
alhamdulillah.
Okay. All right, that's it. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah.
Man,
good.
Yeah, I'm serious about that. You know, I everybody always asks me what I want.